So today we'll be talking about the ENTJ personality types, and as usual I will talk about the theory of the two subtypes, key variables that distinguish the two between each other, and variables to look for in general from all the personality types to distinguish the ENTJ personality types. So basically how to spot these kind of personality types in the world at large today. Afterwards, I will present you with key examples from people around the world so that you will know how to spot these people yourself or just have a general idea of what these personalities look like. As a source of description, I am taking McGegg's and Ovkorov's socionics subtypes descriptions in order to explain the theory, and we'll just dive in right now. So the logical subtype offers an impression of mobility despite being a strict and efficient person. Their expression lacks emotion and focuses directly in a fixed manner on the intellector for the sake of emphasis. They're a little timid but try to hide this, but also a bit mistrustful, critical, and unduly categorical. They are also distracted with great difficulty, and they work diligently to complete tasks. Despite a habit of reflection, they are resolute and impulsive in their words and actions. Inclined to long conversations, a desire to seem constant, cautious, and serious causes them to portray stiffness in their dialogue. Their seemingly calmness can quickly be replaced by unexpected haste. In most cases, their figures is thick-set and their movements are angular. Try to hold themselves confidently so as to maintain their advantage. When they joke, they are serious. Expression is hardly distributed by indistinct smiles that manifest itself solely on the corners of their lips. So, key variables, key factors to look for when you're looking for the ENTJ extrovert thinking subtype. Notice that they are very mobile personality type and they therefore strict and efficient. So this tends to be a very, to one word description I would say is that they're very efficient. And the efficiency is actually something you'll notice in a person by looking at them. So when I mean efficiency, it tends to be very a sense of hastiness and a rational expression of speed when they're approach to the world and expressing themselves to others. So in the combination, look for mobility and efficiency when looking for the ENTJ extrovert thinking subtype. They're fixed manner, so and in the sense they have a fixed manner, they tend to be kind of almost emotionless in their approach, but it's very rigid, sturdy approach to the world. They can be critical and unduly categorical, resolute and impulsive, and they can also seem very constant and cautious, which makes them portray stiffness in their dialogue. So notice, as I said again, notice the speed and haste of this personality, speaking very quickly or expressing themselves very vigorously to the world, but in a very stiff approach. So it seems to be a constant flatness in their approach to expressing themselves to the others in the world, and that is combined with the unexpected haste that they show themselves. Body-wise or figure-wise, just know they have an angular position. With their movements, at least, with gestures, can have an angular movement. Their body can be somewhat thick-set, but not always the case for sure. But just notice that the tends to be very almost muscular in their approach or their presentation to the world. And they also hold themselves confidently to maintain their advantage. So this was a little more, I don't think these were the key variables to look for, but to just provide you overall summary of what I've noticed, just notice these types are very efficient, and that's probably one of the best words to describe is that they are very hasteful in their approach. Not hastefulness and entrepreneurialness is to be very expressive in a strict efficient manner is something that you should look for when looking for this subtype. Now for the other subtype, the intuitive subtype, as a description, these types are fallible, kind, and pleasant in dialogue. They possess a developed sense of humor that frequently makes them the soul of the company, very mobile, restless, and scattered, always hurrying to make use of their time. Inspired, vigorous, and optimistic, enterprising, safely takes risk and applies new ideas. They have difficulty focusing their attention on one thing for a long time. Diplomatic and gallant with everything, especially the opposite sex, but can also show familiarity towards closer acquaintances due to their propensity towards abundance. They often change steps within their plans, and when they make ethical mistakes, are quick to correct them by means of jokes and various services. Behave simply and naturally. In conversation, they like to concern their interlocutor and to embrace and kiss on gestures and gait when deprived of their underlined facility appear quite natural. So, best words to kind of describe these people is that they tend to be very calm and balanced, but mixed with a sense of optimism and vigorism with their approach to the world. So these might appear as introverted subtypes at times, but they are very talkative and they do talk a lot. So that's something to look for when looking for the introverted subtype of the ENTJs. That's a quick summary, of course, of what are the key things you should look for. They are very valuable, so they're polite and kind and pleasant in dialogue. They look inspired and vigorous and optimistic. And diplomatic is also a key word, so they tend to be very approachable and engaging and understanding of other people. They behave very simply and naturally, so this actually tends to be a very simple approach when approaching people. So they're not very, they don't have hubris, they don't have a sense of pride when expressing themselves. They're very modest in their approach, but because they're extroverted, it's an extroverted sense of modesty that you'll notice. And just notice their gestures, they tend to be very I would also say natural. So natural tends to be very calm, but also angular. And you'll notice a pattern from the way they move their hands for gestures that they tend to keep a circular. Tend to keep it open, and it tends to be very pattern-wise. So it tends to be modest approach of keeping their hands open very smoothly. So as a quick overview, just know that these types tend to be very balanced but very optimistic at the same time, and can be calm and are very insightful and talkative in their sense, but in a very calm manner and optimistic way, which makes them kind and pleasant. And diplomatic is probably a key word to notice about these personality types. So now I'm going to provide you some key examples from the world today for these kind of personalities. And as a summary, the extroverted thinking type, just notice they're efficient and mobile, while the introverted subtype, just know that they're fallible, optimistic, and calm at the same time. So I hope you enjoy what I'm going to show you, and I hope you notice a pattern likewise too.
Very best to report the news fairly, accurately, and responsibly. Of course, we make mistakes, but when we do, we acknowledge them and we fix them. That's the role of journalists. CNN isn't just made up of people that you see on camera like me and our other correspondents. It's made up of thousands and thousands of very hardworking, very dedicated, very caring people here in the United States and indeed around the world. People just like you, men and women.
And they pissed me off, because if you didn't know Ryan, you would not see Ryan in that article. And as always, this is what makes me furious, is that finding the truth out of press today, particularly print medium, is almost impossible. It's impossible. They will not publish an article without first assuming that somebody who they're reporting on is a lying sack of shit.
Really?
That's the position the editor takes in all circumstances.
Wow.
And so it's always seen through this sort of prism of, well, we can't trust this guy. And they pitted Ryan against academic philosophers. And it's like, that's not what Ryan's trying to do. He's not trying to argue with academics. He's trying to improve sort of a platform for equality of, an old philosophy might inform living today. It's all he was doing.
Right.
Tonight, President Trump is heading home to the U.S. right now, leaving this part of the world spinning in unfamiliar directions. It's been a trip unlike any other by an American president, in which Mr. Trump realigned our long-held concepts of friends and adversaries, the EU a foe, Russia to be trusted. The give and take of partisan politics we report at home is not always pretty, but it is on our soil, and as Americans we defend the process, as messy as it gets. But Helsinki was the world stage. The bar, in this case our security and sovereignty, was higher. And as much as we value peace and dialogue, Russia's well-documented offenses struck at the heart of the democracy we so proudly cherish.
He got a tough question, but they all got tough questions. I mean, that opening round of the first debate in particular was all about electability. So we were trying to get to, what's your weak spot? You know, what's going to prevent you from getting the nomination? What's going to prevent you from winning against Hillary, who's going to be the likely Democratic nominee? And that's where I was going with him. But, you know, all those guys they kind of got it right in the kisser.
Yeah.
And, but, you know,
But that's your job as a moderator? Is that?
That's what you have to do. I mean, they want George Washington's job. So I'm a member of the press, and we're supposed to press.
Yeah.
And see if they're worthy.
Life, and you've got to keep them out of harm's way. If, in fact, she's taking that little girl into this tanning booth and putting her in there, particularly to the point that she's getting burned, but at all, that just seems to me to be really running her own agenda. Clearly, she's all focused on this because she looks like, as you say, a hot dog. So maybe she thinks that's cool, all right. But, you know, my dermatologist tells me that most of the damage we have to our skin happens when we're children. So if you're taking a child in there, if she did, she says she didn't, I guess now.
Yeah, she said she didn't.
I don't know. That's not okay with me.
But are you saying just...
Yeah.
And here's her mother. I mean, come on.
Yes.
What's she modeling here? Whether she takes her to the building or just walks around looking like she does, the child's likely to emulate that. Not smart.
Pick a side, and I do pick a side. Do I regard it the same way as sports and therefore pick a side? Because in sports, I'm allowed to pick a side, and I do pick a side and love it partly for that reason. No, I don't think so. I don't have unlike in the World Series, I don't have skin in the game. I have a lot of skin in that game. I don't. But I think, like most people, I do recognize the obvious similarities between sports and politics because there are tons. And if you love baseball, you love strategy. There's tons of strategy in politics. If you like hockey, you love elbows up in the corner. It's a tough game. So's politics. I don't have...
Shortage is because it's made in Washington. There's no need for the gas shortage. There's a problem in oil. Oil is expensive. The fact that the OPEC nations have formed an effective monopoly and quadrupled the price of oil hurts us. No question. We pay more. But we have multiplied the injury to ourselves by our bad government policies. Here's Japan we were talking about a moment ago. Japan. It's 100% dependent on foreign oil. It has no gas lines. Why? Because it hasn't tried to prevent prices from adjusting things. If the OPEC nations had been hiring our energy regulators as their agents,
They couldn't have done a better job.
They couldn't have done a better job.
Learned is there are a few major barriers to connectivity, and they're not necessarily what you would have thought up front. For example, the first one is that a lot of people just don't have any access to a network, right? So it's a technical barrier. They don't, even if they had a phone and could pay for data, there would be no equivalent of a cell phone tower near them to access that. And you know, that's what a lot of people think about when they think about not having connectivity. And there are projects like satellites and drones and things that we're working on that can help create connectivity technical solutions in areas where there aren't that today. And that's important, but it turns out that that's actually a pretty small part of the problem. Only about 15% of people who aren't connected because of a technical barrier.
Specifics and
But
whether confirming or denying whatever you discussed. I mentioned in the CEO roundtable a comment that was made by one of my national security team. This is more like basketball than football in the sense that there's no clear line between offense and defense. Things are going back and forth all the time. We have great capabilities here, but there are other countries that have great capabilities as well. Eventually, what we're going to need to do is to find some international protocols that, in the same way we did with nuclear arms, set some clear limits and guidelines, understanding that everybody's vulnerable and everybody's better off if we abide by certain behaviors. In the meantime, we have to have sufficient capability to defend ourselves, and by
Is that just defense or offense?
Well, I won't lie to you. This is a debate that we have internally, because when you develop sufficient
smoking something, I think that's. I mean, Nigel Farage is a very brilliant politician, but I think he's radically overemphasizing his own view. Look, what I think Brexit did is that it dislodged the normal, it dislodged the usual, and created a space in which more unusual things could happen. I mean, but let's not get into the view that this is kind of an irreversible historical change.
But it is different.
We might be back in the autumn, and Angela Merkel has won the German election, and we'll think very differently about the shape of the history we're living. That's what I'm saying.
And appointing Earl Warren and leading to a much more radical court than anybody had imagined. So by the early 1960s, you had a reaction building in the country that said government's too big, our policy against the Soviet Union is too weak, taxes are too high, and frankly, we don't want Washington running our lives. The guy who personified that was Barry Goldwater, and he wrote a little book called Conscience of a Conservative, which came out in paperback. And I was a college student at the time, and it just swept the country. I mean, it really created a whole generation of Goldwater supporters who really saw him.
Role as a policymaker. There is, being a scholar, as you know, especially the research and writing, is kind of a lonely monk enterprise. You have to do a lot of it by yourself. And it was very exciting to be engaged with Madeleine Albright and President Clinton and other people who are really trying to make progress in laying a foundation for better relations with China during that period. And remember, this is right after 1996, which was a time that we actually came into an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation with China. And so when I came to Washington, I and other members of the
years old, and the teacher complained to my mother, the Montessori school teacher complained to my mother that I was too task-focused and that she couldn't get me to switch tasks, so she would have to just pick up my chair and move me. And by the way, I think that's, if you ask the people who work with me, that's still probably true today.
Did that teacher ever call you since and say that she was responsible for your success? Have you ever called you? No?
No, I'm in touch with several of my high school and elementary school teachers, though, but I don't know any of my Montessori school teachers.
Okay. So the gift that you're giving...
Anything I've ever done has started small. Amazon started with a couple of people, and Blue Origin started with 5 people, and the budget at Blue Origin was very, very small. Now the budget at Blue Origin approaches $1 billion a year. And next year it'll be more than $1 billion. And Amazon, it literally was 10 people. Today it's 500,000 people, but it's hard to remember for you guys, but for me it's like yesterday I was driving the packages to the post office myself, and hoping one day we could afford a forklift.
With Brad Wall, we couldn't be more different in terms of our philosophy on a lot of things. But when I sit down with Brad Wall and we talk about issues together, it goes very well. And I have every intention of working on federal issues with Kathleen Wynne when the official opposition can be of help. Toronto, look at the gridlock around this city. I mean, people lose on average 32 working days a year. That's a $6 billion a year loss for the economy. No ability to plan long term. Toronto is by far Canada's largest city, but also by far Canada's most important city.
If I understand it, now look, you guys, I'm being as objective as I can. I am a voter and taxpayer, but Steve Bannon is this advisor to the U.S. president, and his vision is, he thinks, my understanding is Mr. Bannon's position is that government is inherently bad, so he wants to destroy it from within. So he has influenced the president to nominate or hire people for agencies that are singularly unqualified for it, uniquely unqualified. To those of us in the science community, the evidence for climate change is overwhelming. I mean, my goodness, let's go, people. It's been going on. And this last year, we got to 400.5 parts per million of carbon dioxide at a rate that is
a variety of other locations. I think that provided NATO once again a true focus. It has manifested itself in the reestablishment of a maritime command under NATO. There's a logistical command at Ulm here in Germany to push forces out to the east of Europe. So there is, I think, a sense of renewed purpose. And I think you should very clearly, read the tweets, but also follow the troops, follow the money, and follow the policy. And if you do that, you see that actually the U.S. contribution to NATO has not only continued under the trajectory that was established by the previous administration with forces in the Baltic states from the U.S. and other countries, more forces in Eastern Europe, the return of an armor brigade to Europe, but also much greater U.S. military readiness across the board. And